I feel like in our generation, especially, right now, social media is huge, playing into comparing yourself to other people because it's like, oh, you see all this going on and that going on and all this, and so, we've talked about this in the past too, but you have to understand that social media is a snapshot of what's really going on. So you're comparing your whole life to a snapshot, to a moment in time of somebody else's life that may or may not even be real. That's the other thing, right? So it's, I think, like you said, it's a dangerous thing being able to distinguish between jealousy and or admiration, right?
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Everything's Okay, a mental health podcast brought to you by the one and only Crazy Ant Media. On today's episode, we will be discussing the difficult scenario of comparison. Comparing yourself to other people, comparing your situation to other situations, and just trying to overcome the sensibility of, the mythological timeline, as we talk about it all the time, of life, where we're at in life, where we're going, where other people are at, and you think we're all supposed to be on the same journey, but we're not. We're never on the same journey. We've talked about
No.
that multiple freaking times. But yeah, I think comparison, man, it can definitely take a toll on your mental health when you're thinking about, especially status, I guess. If you look at other people's status, specifically for the people who you went to school with, or the people who you've idolized growing up, or like people who are even in the entertainment industry now that are the same age as you. And how many times have you heard people say, man, what am I doing with my life if they're doing this with theirs?
Right.
So I mean, it's one of those things where it's a double-edged sword, where you're like, you're envious, but you're like, it's a darker jealousy, but you're like, it weighs on you. And that type of emotion and that type of thinking can definitely, I feel like, hold you back in everyday life.
Oh, absolutely. And I know for our listeners out there, everybody is pondering this, right? And it's like, I guess, why do we do it? If we know it's
Right.
bad, why do we do it, right? Well, one, I feel like it's human nature to compare yourself to other people. That's just
Yeah.
it's just something inherently built into, and I don't even want to say just human nature. You see, all forms of life do it. Animals. Yeah, there's a reason why you'll see out in the jungle the big cats fight, because they're one wants to be the leader of the pack, the other one not. They compare themselves as to where they are and who they are, and then of course we have to talk about it though, right? Like, I feel like in our generation, especially, right now, social media is huge, playing into comparing yourself to other people because it's like, oh, you see all this going on and that going on and all this, and so, we've talked about this in the past too, but you have to understand that social media is a snapshot of what's really going on. So you're comparing your whole life to a snapshot, to a moment in time of somebody else's life that may or may not even be real. That's the other thing, right? So it's, I think, like you said, it's a dangerous thing being able to distinguish between jealousy and or admiration, right? Because I feel like those are the when you compare yourself to other people, I feel like you want to say it's admiration. You admire them. You admire where they're at or what they're doing or how they've done what they've done. But what you're really doing is saying you're upset that you're not there yet. And so there's that fine line between admiring somebody's success and being jealous of somebody's success. And I think that's where the whole comparison issue gets yourself into trouble, right?
Yeah, most definitely. And I feel like, it's worse when you're younger, I feel like, but I mean, even people in your generation and older, they still do the comparison game. I mean, I I have a grandmother who I believe would love to be in like Dolly Parton shoes, or like to be able to be that type of success, that type of fame, that type of notoriety to where, you can do whatever you want basically because money's not a problem. So, I mean, there's different situations that I feel like can hold you back with that because, specifically for me, when I jumped into the film and television game, I would look at people like Tom Holland, Zendaya, people around my age group where I'm like, okay, what went wrong? Like, and then I think about like putting blame on other people. I'm like, was it my parents' fault for not getting me involved in things too early? And like, no, no, no. Like everybody has their own path where they're headed as far as their trajectory and their journey, like we've talked about before. But I just feel like it puts you in a down spot because we all have struggles. We all go through something to where we feel like you don't see the ending. You don't see what the light is on the other side, and you just have to wait it out. A lot of life is a waiting game while you're trying to move forward, I
Yeah.
feel like. And that's the interesting part because, again, we've talked about it, not having a handbook, not having a specific guide, even though people try to create one, at this age I'm going to be married, at this age I'm going to be the boss of my job, at this
Right.
age I'm
Right.
going to buy a house. So I feel like in retrospect, especially on that level, it definitely brings it holds you down in some certain regard because then when you're alone at night at the end of the day, whenever you're just thinking and stewing and like, what am I doing wrong? Or it turns into a certain situation where sometimes it happens with me of burnout. You work yourself so hard because you're trying to compete, you're trying to be that next big thing, but then you're like, okay, I literally am so out of focus on everything to where I can't be productive at all.
Right.
So it's a give and a take. It's a balance.
Well, and you brought up a good point of comparing yourself to somebody your age that's already seen a lot of success. But what I think a lot of people don't realize, and you just said it yourself about did my parents not get me started early enough or whatever. Zendaya and Tom Holland, and they've been doing it for decades already, even though they're only in their 20s, right? They started as little kids. And so it wasn't an overnight success. They were rich and famous when they were young. It was literally working 15 or 20 years to get there, even though they're only 26 or 27 or 28 or whatever. They've already put in 2 decades of work to get to where they're at. And I feel like anybody who's playing the comparison game, they're not looking at the fact that anything you're trying to do in life is a long game. Right, it's anybody who you view as your inspiration or as your role model or whatever it is. The fact of the matter is if you were to sit down and have a one-on-one conversation with them, they would tell you that it took years for them to get where they were, not just overnight. But you don't see it that way. You see it as, well, they're my age and they have that. You don't realize how long it took them to get where they were getting or how many failures they had to go through to get there. And so that's the other thing too, right? I think that if you're gonna have a role model or somebody that you are inspired by or whatever, learn from that. Learn from their successes because I feel like if you look at them and you look at what they've been successful at, then you would realize what they failed at first to get there. And then you get into that right mindset that your journey is your journey and you're going to have failures in order to get to your successes. And if you can stay in that mindset and know that that's how it works, then you're going to be okay. I think that when we get into we go from, because we're talking about how, you can have somebody who inspires you and then it becomes your jealousy of them. And then you can talk about how somebody is your inspired by them, but then it becomes a competition with them. And when it becomes a competition with them to try to match them, then it gets even worse. Then it becomes this downward spiral. So you have to keep looking at it as everybody is different. And I feel like build your own role model culture. Like, because right now, you, me, dozens of other people out there are someone's role model, right? Like they're looking at us going, wow, why can't we have already done what they've done? So you have to put yourself into a mindset and understand that while you might not be where you're at, where you want to be yet, you're already where somebody else is trying to get. And I feel like that helps keep you mentally stable so much more than the constant all you think about is where you're not. Think about where you are and what you've done and go from it from that angle. That's literally what I try to do. It's like, okay, am I where I'm at? Am I where I want to be at this particular moment? Not necessarily. But what have I done? Look at all the things I've done that other people can never say they've done. So that's how I try to, every time I get burnt out, like you said, I feel like, well, look back and look what you've actually accomplished and take it that way. And then, that just motivates me even more to stop comparing myself to others and just keep on the path that I'm going on, because it is working. It's just taking time.
Yeah, I mean, that's right. I feel like too, I like that you brought up the competition aspect of it as well, because you think about all of the people who everyone looks up to, you think about what people want to strive to be in life.
Right.
And when they feel like they don't meet that mark where the person they look up to is, then they feel like they are a failure. But they don't even, I think we do too much of thinking about other people rather than thinking about ourselves, because
Exactly.
I think we think more about other people's skills and trying to emulate those skills rather than our skills, what we're good at, and trying to maintain and hone in and grind those skills out. So I feel like it's so weird because, a football player, say a quarterback, they're striving to be the next Tom Brady. So if they feel like they don't reach that in that particular way, then they're a failure or they're not happy with their career. Or, I mean, if you go back and look at freaking Dan Marino, for example, not to get too sportsy because we are sports guys, but we try to not be as crazy. But if you look at Dan Marino, this is one of the most skilled quarterbacks of all time, maybe one of the best of all time, but never won a Super Bowl ring. So it's one of those things where, does he consider himself a failure since not getting to the promised land? Or does he consider himself a success because of all the accolades and all of the memories that he made for that Miami team? So it's a give and take of trying to reach the pinnacle of success to where your admirers, the people you admire are, and also trying to stray away from that as well, to create your own destiny, to create your own being, to create your own memory of who you are as a person, and not trying to fit in somebody else's shoes, because your shoes are good and ready to go. So you have to walk in your shoes instead of trying to fit into somebody else's.
Well, and your shoes are in a different environment and on a different path. Like the Dan Marino comparison, Dan Marino will tell you, if you look at the numbers that Dan Marino put up, Dan Marino put those numbers up when the league was not a passing league, right? The league that Tom Brady excelled in shifted to a quarterback-led league. It was a driven decision by the league to make it a passing game. We want to see it aired out more. We want to see bombs. We want to see these huge. And so what he accomplished was in a totally different atmosphere than what Dan Marino did. So when you look at Dan Marino putting up 4,000-yard seasons or 40 or 50 touchdowns in a season or whatever, this is when you were supposed to be handing off the ball. Right. So yeah, and you look at back at that era with the John Riggins and Franco Harris's and all these power runners that were the focus of the game. Dan Marino's like, I'm just gonna chart my own path. I'm gonna start throwing. I'm gonna start doing this kind of stuff. And he changed the game. He revolutionized the game. So it's an unfair comparison to say who did what, and because I don't think Brady has 7 rings and does what he does if he comes up in Marino's era. I don't. I don't. I think he was able to accomplish what he accomplished because the league was meant for him to do that. And so, not to take anything away from Brady, he's a brilliant quarterback and he thrived in the system that was built, but it was geared for him. It's for me, I look at it, I think Marino, and then we'll get away from the sports comparisons, but I think Marino was the better quarterback because he did what he did outside of the norm. In a league built for running, he became an elite passer. Tom Brady was an elite passer in a league built for passing. So there's I think you're better if you're doing something outside of what you're supposed to be doing and being successful at it, as opposed to you're really successful in something that you're supposed to be really successful at. That's just my opinion of it. So, it sucks that Marino never got a ring, but what he did was amazing. And that just takes me to the recognizing your own skills and not comparing them to someone else's skills, right? Because it's not necessarily the same. Like people who are seeing success in our field, for example, now, even us, for being able to get our first film done and things, it's a much, and I'm not trying to take away anything that we've done either, but I'm just going to say it's a much easier path now, because you can just pick up a camera and shoot something now, and you can go do, before it just wasn't like that. So when you're looking for us comparing ourselves to a Spielberg or a Scorsese or something, those guys just couldn't go pick up their phone and shoot a camera, shoot a film and put it up on a screen somewhere. It was a whole process, and it was built against them back then. So I think that comparison thing is you got to stop comparing your skill set and your talent to someone else's because your playing field is completely different. And so you have to only look at what you're doing in your playing field. Don't worry about that because you're not on that field. Yeah, that field is gone. You're on this field. What do you do in this field? And I think if you approach it that way, and then just kind of move forward in your own lane, in your own time, you're going to be far more successful. That's what I think. It's great to admire somebody and try to maybe emulate some things that they've done, but you've got to figure out a way to do it in your own time and in your own lane and on your own field, as opposed to trying to copy exactly what they did, because that's just impossible. You're never going to be able to do that.
Yeah, I completely agree. And yeah, there's so many different examples throughout history because when James Franco first came onto the scene in the entertainment industry, they thought he was going to be the next James Dean. There was a lot of comparison there. And there was a lot of comparison, with like Leonardo DiCaprio and Robert De Niro. And, this whole back and forth. And the press doesn't do well. Sometimes family and your own personal life doesn't do well. Because how many times as a kid had you heard, why are you doing this? Why can't you be like your brother? Why can't you be like your sister? Something along those lines. So we have to really think about how we approach people when it comes to giving constructive criticism, which we're not good at as a society. On an individual basis, because you have to approach everybody differently. You have to make sure you take the necessary steps to where they can fully grasp what you're trying to say to them. And I think that's one of the biggest things too, because we are very bad about communicating. I feel like, very clear communication is making sure you lay out all of your thoughts, make sure they're all on the table, make sure the other person hears them, and then let the other person basically say the same thing back to you, at least what they interpreted it as, because I feel like the communication, there's always like that freaking telephone game Like every time you play a game of telephone, if someone says red flowers at the very beginning, it's gonna come off as a freaking gray Pontiac at the very end. You
Yeah.
know, it's gonna be completely different. So it's all about communicating properly with who you're talking to, and making sure your opinion is very clear and your voice is very clear. Because then if you do that, then the person isn't going to get this preconceived notion of what you might think about them or what they think about you. And it just, because first impressions are a big thing. First impressions are a big thing, especially in the entertainment industry, but especially in life. You have to make sure that, if you meet your future wife's husband or your future wife's dad late early down the line, you're gonna have to, make sure you make a first impression, because those people are going to be around the rest of your life. So you have to make sure you have a good relationship. But yeah, as far as comparing yourself, especially in relationships wise, I think that was a hard thing too, because nobody had gotten married in her friend group yet. And nobody, I think some people had started getting married in my friend group just because I'm a couple of years older. But we did a bad job about comparing ourselves to different people who were specifically getting out and getting houses and getting their own apartments and things like that. But again, everybody is dealt different cards. Not everybody is dealt a freaking flush the
Yeah.
first
Yeah.
time. You're not going to get that and cash out your chips. You have to play your hand, keep being patient, and when the time comes around, you'll be able to play that card and you'll be able to cash in. So I think that's just the biggest thing, because there's not enough patience in today's society. I don't feel like, you don't give yourself enough patience to learn something new or to give anyone else patience either, because, we're and I attribute this to social media. We're very at the point where we want something done now because we can get this here, we can get that there. Like, how many people, as far as convenience wise, even if it takes a little longer, how many people order things from Amazon before leaving the house and going to go check Walmart?
Right.
It's things like that. So it's one of the things where you have to just keep yourself mentally motivated, be patient with yourself, be patient with others, and just try to be the happiest you can be, because comparing yourself to somebody else is not going to do you any justice at the end of the day.
No, and I feel like what you were saying with the people getting this or getting that, or numbers will show you, facts are facts, that the people who don't exhibit the patience, and they do run out and get the house because they can, or they do go out and do this because they can, the numbers show, the facts are there, that they typically fall apart later in life. That stuff goes away. It ends up being broken. It ends up being something that doesn't go the way they want it to. Where if you have the patience and you follow the journey and you play it when it's supposed to play, those are far more successful than the people who cash in early. And that's just fact. And I think because we talk about this all the time, but that's because your journey, it's already predetermined, guys and gals. It's all, and what is supposed to happen for you is going to happen for you, and it's going to happen when it's supposed to happen. And the whole point of the journey, I think the biggest learning curve for all of us is understanding the patience it takes for your journey to play out. I think that's the one thing that God gave to humans. It's like, your one job that I have for you is to learn patience, because I have it all set for you. Everything that is supposed to happen for you, with who it's supposed to happen with, when it's supposed to happen, how it's, I've got that. You need to learn patience so that you can be on the journey I have you on without getting upset or trying to go off the journey or get things too soon. And yeah, I think once you learn that, then all the comparison stuff stops, because you're on your journey and you're taking your time, your path. And like, it doesn't matter if this person is zooming and this person's falling back. It's just, this is you. So don't worry about this person. Don't worry about this person. Just worry about you. And I think that that's important. And the thing I'd like to kind of like wrap it up with is, I think that when we start the comparison game and we start looking at other people and where they're at, or how we deem success or failure or whatever, it only becomes negative and we forget the positive. You have to, you were saying that communication is important and you have to listen to what people are saying, and decent critique, right? Instead of attacking people, actually critique them with some sort of good criticism. But that starts at home with you. You have to speak positively to yourself. You have to give yourself affirmation. Tell yourself you're good enough. Tell yourself you're at a point where you're already successful. Because if you are not being honest with yourself and being positive towards yourself, if you can't look in the mirror and say you're happy with who you are, then it doesn't matter what anybody else tells you. It doesn't matter, because you're never going to get to a point where you feel that happiness unless you are at a point where you can look in the mirror and say, I am happy with who I am. I am happy with what I have. I am happy with where I am going. If you can't do that, then nothing else matters. So I think it's critically important when we're playing the comparison game to first look in the mirror and say, are you able to say, I'm good enough, I'm okay, I'm happy? Because if you're not, then you've got a lot of work to do. You got a lot of work to do before you can get to where you want to go. And that would be my advice for anybody listening out there. Until you focus here, like you said at the very top of this thing, it's you got to focus here first, and then worry about everybody else. So that would be my advice. And that's good, because I really do feel like the people that aren't focused on themselves and that aren't doing the work on the self-healing, those are the people making the comparisons and trying to live up to other people and trying to live other people's lives because they're not happy with their own life. Right? Don't you typically think you fall into wanting to emulate someone else's life because you're not happy with your own? You don't want to go out and copy somebody else's life that if you're happy, right? So
Yeah.
that's my thought on it.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's one of those things where, I just saw an article that said comparison is the thief of joy. And I completely
Yes.
agree,
Yeah.
because I mean, it does suck the life out of you. I mean, it
It
makes
does.
you to where you don't feel like you can be your true self, being able to do that. So it's crazy, man. It is crazy. But have you ever compared yourself to anybody else?
Um.
Right?
Honestly, maybe career wise.
Yeah.
Career wise in the entertainment industry, yes. But life wise, no, because I've always been the renegade. I've always been
Yeah.
like, I don't want to be like anybody else. I don't want to be. I want to be me, and I'm happy to just be reckless and outside of what you think I should be. So no, on the on the life side of it, kind of like, nah, I'm just living my life and I don't give a shit. But definitely on the career side, I felt like, yeah, there are people my age that have been putting in the similar time and they've seen this or they've seen that it gets to you, I think, a little bit. It certainly does. But I have found that I have become more successful after stopping doing that. Because then you just focus in on what makes you happy, and then that happiness comes. So, yeah, yeah. How about you? I mean, I'm sure, right? Like, I think everybody does at some point.
Oh yeah, for sure. And I mean, like I said, I mean, at career wise, yeah, definitely. Like I was saying at the beginning with Tom Holland, Zendaya, I mean, Timothy Chalamet, whatever. But freaking like, yeah, I think I go back and look at people's ages when they became successful, when their big thing hit, and that always like trips me up sometimes. So I have tried to not do that as much. And that's been very helpful. But as far as life goes, I mean, I still do. I a little bit when it comes to people's timelines, because I'm just like, oh, they look so happy, so I would love to experience that if I haven't gotten to experience it yet. But being able to have already experienced a lot of things, it's better being inside your own bubble rather than trying to break into somebody else's
Oh,
bubble.
absolutely.
And it's definitely one of those things where you have to learn to love yourself. We've talked about that a lot. You have to learn to love yourself and who you are and what you want out of life. And you have to have a lot of conversations with yourself, a lot of inner thought to where you can truly find who you are so that you can find out what you want out of life, because you only get one life and you just want to make sure you live it to the fullest. But I think it's very important to do so, because
Yeah.
like I said, you only have a certain amount of years on this earth, so you got to just enjoy them while you can.
And look, man, the reality of it is when you are living in someone else's bubble, it inevitably pops
Yeah,
because it ain't your bubble, and it's
exactly.
not your happiness. You're sponging off of someone else's happiness because it's not your legit bubble, and
Yep.
that is always going to be a disaster. You've got to find your own little space, your own little bubble, and build from there. You know, it's nice to look at other people and go, "Wow, they're really happy," and I'd like to emulate that or have that, but that's their bubble. You know, and eventually you will not be able to fit in that bubble anymore. It will burst, and you've got to find your own. And so yeah, I think the whole point of this entire conversation in this show is to avoid comparison, work on self-reflection, work on self, learn to love yourself. That's how you avoid these comparison issues, and that's how you will provide inspiration for others, is to start to work on yourself. That's I feel like it's the key to this entire podcast from the very beginning, right? Like, we're 38 episodes in now, and from the very beginning it's work on yourself, work on yourself, work on yourself. I mean, key to mental health, work on yourself.
Yeah, that's what it's all about, man. Keep moving forward, learning yourself every single day. Because I mean, like I said before, I think we've talked about it on here that, my mom just found out that she had anxiety a couple of years ago. She thought she was just mean and would get worked up about things, but it's like, no, you have anxiety, which ends up making you cause and be like this. So now she learns how to do like mechanisms and tools and exercises to calm down. And
For
it's just,
sure.
again, finding yourself, man. Finding yourself, finding what you like, finding what you don't like, finding out what works for you, because that's all that matters.
Yep.
And just being able to continue to move forward and loving yourself, like you said. And it's very important just to remember that everything's okay.